Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof for the 4th of December 2024. Geopolitics video. First, Bidenomics took Aleppo, now he launched a coup in South Korea. Does this man's power have no limits? The idea that the Ukrainians are behind everything, according to the Russians, that the Ukrainians have a hand in the resurgence of the Syrian rebels, that maybe even South Korea, so on and so forth. I thought we'd start with that. Right. Russia may be linked to over 100, quote, suspicious incidents in Europe, Czech foreign minister says. In 2024, 500 such incidents, including hybrid attacks and espionage, were recorded across the EU. We must send Moscow a clear signal that this won't be tolerated. It's this hybrid warfare that is going on somewhat unchecked. The Russians are able to do X, Y, and Z, and we either turn a blind eye, or in places like the US, it's like, well, let's just ignore that and blame Ukraine for everything. We're going to come to that a little bit later. There's some insane stuff coming out of the US in terms of what people like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson are doing and saying. It just blows my mind. Anyway, wow. So a Russian warship has fired at a German helicopter, sparking new conflict escalation fears. That is news that's just sort of been filtering out of late. In fact, I saw another recent one on that. I can't remember. I can't seem to find it. Yeah, here we go. Tagesspiel. Crew of a Russian ship in the Baltic Sea fired a signal ammunition at a German chopper. Russians do what the Russians do, I guess. Goodness me. And a Russian delegate leads the Security Council, UN Security Council. I find this absolutely staggering. Session on Syria as White Helmets director Raed Saleh begins his speech. Now, the White Helmets, if you don't know, the people who work really hard. They have been a little bit politicized, but they work really hard to free people who have been caught up in rubble, who've been bombed by predominantly the Russians, right? But also, you know, the Syrian regime, Assad regime. And here you can just see the Russian contingent getting up and leaving as soon as this guy starts talking. I'll turn off the sound there. I think it's the height of rudeness. These guys have a supposedly permanent sort of seat, or one of the seats at the Security Council. I think they should be thrown off the Security Council with immediate effect. It amazes me that they are still there. Absolutely staggering. Right, moving on. We have a footage has emerged. I just thought I forgot actually that I put this together. So they are here. We've got the Russians leaving the Security Council while someone is speaking on behalf of, you know, citizens who are trapped in rubble as a result of the bombing of the Russians. And at the same time, footage is emerging that at exactly the same time that was happening, there was footage of Russian bombs striking a hospital in Idlib. Absolutely incredible. The footage here, you got people down hospital wings, you know, waiting for treatment. Massive bomb hits a hospital. The Russians in Syria have already had an awful lot of form of striking hospitals in Syria. It's absolutely incredible what the Russians do. I reminded you the other day that it was at Médecins Sans Frontières that provided Russia with the coordinates of 24 hospitals and medical centers to say don't hit these, and the Russians went about and hit all of them. They took the coordinates that they were given and used them to strike hospitals on purpose. And then that's what they've done in Ukraine. They've struck medical centers, not all the time. Some of them are accidentally struck or indiscriminate strikes or whatever, but they also are purposefully hitting such institutions and organizations and buildings in Ukraine. Right, the Syrian rebels, the HTS, who have been the ones who have taken over Aleppo and are moving south towards Hama. They've overrun the Syrian army base and the 25th Division in the Hama province and captured dozens of fully intact T90A. So these are they're not the best variant of the T90. That's the T90M. You got the export, which is T90S, but these are the basic version of the T90, which is the newest Russian tank. Tiger MRAPs, BM-21 multiple launch rocket systems, trucks and other armoured vehicles. Syrian division was one of the better equipped ones, as we can see. Wow, so much equipment and all looks in pretty good nick. Russian equipment that, again, I'll pay you 20p if you can get that to Ukraine. They'd love all that stuff. My goodness, would they? Right, US Army Europe commander has said Putin risks losing naval resources in 3 different regions simultaneously. So Putin confronts potential losses in maritime assets in Syria. So Tartus, if that port goes, we've already seen some Russian naval ships, vessels remove themselves from Tartus. You got the Black Sea that's in an awful lot of trouble, and the Baltic regions as well. They are unable to move around the Baltics as easily as they once were, with Finland and Denmark and the Baltic nations saying, nah, that's not happening anymore. Yeah, it's interesting how the influence of Russia has waned with the decision to invade Ukraine. In some ways, at least. Now, diamond giants Botswana and Angola agreed to push Russia out of the market. The world's top 2nd and 4th diamond producers are stepping up to help the G7 and the EU prevent Russian stones from entering global markets. Of course, that will benefit them as well, no doubt, as the lack of supply will push up the price, although it's already quite a controlled market anyway. I think we talk about how the lack of something is what makes it valuable, but in terms of diamonds, I do have the understanding that it's somewhat of a false scenario whereby, yeah, diamonds aren't like as common as I guess coal, but they reduce the supply onto the market by mining the diamonds and then keep hold of them. I think the South Africans do a good job of that. So it's kind of like a false scarcity to some degree, but I may be wrong there. Anyway, good news in my books that Russia, who are big sort of on the diamond markets, are being hopefully pushed out by some of the other competitors. Now, Maria Zakharova, the foreign ministry spokeswoman, has had her Malta, her visa for the OSCE meeting in Malta was cancelled with the wording, quote, due to circumstances beyond their control. It is expected that Russia's war against Ukraine will remain at the centre of attention of the heads of foreign affairs at that meeting that's due to take place. Okay, now moving on from Russia to the larger world as it pertains to the Ukraine. I don't know how much it is relevant to Ukraine concerning what has taken place in South Korea, but there was this martial law that was instituted yesterday as the president, Yoon Suk Yeol, called martial law. It seems as a reaction to his wife, basically him and his wife, mired in scandal, and they've now opened impeachments on him. It looks opposition parties have submitted motions to impeach Yoon after his shock bid to put South Korea under martial law for the first time in over 4 decades. It's probably a bit no point getting too much into this now, but I'm sure I read somewhere that the opposition leader was actually pretty pro-Ukrainian. Now, there's been the situation this week whereby the Ukrainians have visited, I think it was Umarov, the defense minister, maybe Bihar, the foreign minister, visited South Korea in hopes of getting or buying South Korean military equipment. They're one of the biggest exporters of military equipment. They've got an awful lot because they're consistently at war effectively with North Korea. But they came away empty-handed and then subsequently got given like $100 million contribution towards, I don't know, was it energy security or something like that. That was not ideal, but if the opposition leader is pro-Ukrainian, that's good. It seems to be, though, a reflection of the general public sentiment towards Ukraine, which isn't particularly strong in South Korea, which is a real shame. And it could be that the embattled South Korean president was just reading the tea leaves of the public sentiment there and decided not to sell them equipment. Although it has to be said that it's difficult with how the constitution's written there. This is the, I think, South China Morning. Is it South China Morning Press? Is South Korea's rejection of Ukraine's weapons request due to Trump or public opinion objection? Ukraine has long sought to acquire air defense missiles and artillery shells from South Korea, which is wary of doing so due to the laws involved. But they did go away empty-handed. It's not the first time that Ukraine had expressed wishes to purchase South Korean anti-air missiles and artillery shells. Let's see what else what this article says. Seoul reiterated its position, citing laws prohibiting arms exports to active war zones. The source added on condition of anonymity. Observers suggest that Yoon administration is hesitant to deepen its involvement in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, particularly as public opinion in South Korea largely opposes such a move. Additionally, Yoon faces domestic challenges, including a low approval rating. So, indeed, since this article was written, there was all the craziness of helicopters in the air and armed forces on the streets and martial law being called and then being repealed and impeachment. The government is wary of taking steps that might strain relations with the second Trump administration, which has vowed to end the war within 24 hours of taking office, according to observers. So there is a very close relationship between the US and South Korea. And if South Korea does something now just before the inauguration of Trump, it might just anger Trump, and they might be being super, super cautious there. Now, it's worth noting what South Korea is like when it comes to presidents. Going back to Jake Bro says, going back further in time than 1988 doesn't help. South Korean presidential politics can really only be compared to something like Game of Thrones. So, deposed, killed, removed in a military coup, sentenced to death after completing presidential term, sentenced to 22 years in prison after the end of presidential term, imprisoned until his term as president. As president, he imprisoned two of his predecessors. But before becoming president, he was imprisoned and sentenced to death, later pardoned. Indicted, overturned by a constitutional court after his presidential term ended. He was investigated for corruption, committed suicide. After ending presidential term, he is arrested and remains in custody on corruption charges. Indicted, detained on corruption charges, released and pardoned. That's the list of the presidents. Just absolutely insane. So, yeah, I guess par for the course if he is going to be impeached. Anyway, moving on from South Korea. Georgia. It's not looking good in Georgia at the moment, to be perfectly frank, at least as far as I can tell. Last night, there was a massive deployment of police forces, internal security forces, and squeezing out all the resources to intimidate us, unsurprisingly, says Marika Mikiashvili. You can see here from this footage, just huge numbers of security force members here on the streets of Tbilisi. So it is... it didn't look good last night. I mean, just look at that. Look at those numbers there. Just incredible. So those are your security force members. That's what the population are up against. And it seems that they are getting heavy-handed, the security forces now. Brutal detentions of opposition leaders have begun in Georgia. It is not looking good there. So yeah, old school Soviet tactics. I do worry about the future democracy there now. The Georgians really need to remain strong, but it's easier said than done, isn't it? We'll have to see what happens tonight. Okay, NATO Security General Mark Rutte suggested that Ukraine postpone any peace talks with Russia. Wow, according to the New York Times. Quote, this should be done while Western allies can send enough military assistance to help Kyiv advance on the battlefield and take a more advantageous position in negotiations. Now, Mark Rutte is taking a strong position on support for Ukraine, and we're going to come back to Mark Rutte in the US segment in a while. Now, France is all going a bit Pete Tong in France. It's really challenging there. I don't know what the latest is. I'm just having a look on my news feed over here. I don't know if any news has come out about France as I speak. There's a live feed. I'm not sure if there's any outcome. Anyway, far-right leader Jordan Bardella has warned the French government will fall this week unless there is a last-minute miracle, according to Politico, the end of Barnier's time. So you got Michel Barnier, centre-right, in charge of this kind of centre-right government that was put in place after the last government basically evaporated. If you remember, there was the European elections that went badly for France, or at least for the establishment parties in France. The far right, Marine Le Pen's Rassemblement National party did very well, and then Macron saw that, called a snap election. It was about third. Left, centre, right, or far right and right, and as a result, a new government was formed with Michel Barnier at the top of it, and then that's a no confidence vote has been called today, and that is what is taking place as I speak. So what do we have here? Cyril Chatelain, the leader of the Green Party's parliamentary group, part of the left-wing leaning NFP alliance, so that's your left third, says her MPs' hands will not tremble when it comes to voting for the no confidence motion because they, quote, continue to hope that something better is still possible. The problem is, if you're third, then what better is there going to be than a kind of centrist? The right aren't going to. It's just going to be going surely from one chaotic government to another chaotic government. And at least with the centre, you'll be somewhat appeasing the right and somewhat appeasing the left. If you get a left-wing alliance or a right-wing alliance in, then you're going to be annoying even more people. So I just think. I don't know what they're really hoping to achieve other than to just be difficult for the establishment. And it's this kind of anti-establishment feeling that we're finding is gathering momentum across the world at the moment with every single election. This year, in a record-breaking year of elections, has led to anti-establishment parties doing well. Like the ruling incumbent parties have been voted out. I was just looking at the US election stats earlier, and actually, because we have this argument, I have had these arguments with people online here, and some of you have been like, "Oh, you having a go at me," whatever. I was going to do an impression, but this is such an amazing mandate for Trump. It's a very wide but very shallow mandate, and indeed, it turns out that the House majority is the smallest House majority in the history of the American Parliament as a result of an election. So at the moment, 217 to 215, it takes one Republican to cross the aisle, and potentially you can't get a vote through for the Republicans. And the Senate, okay, there's a bit more of a margin in the Senate. And then obviously the president, but in terms of the popular vote, less than 50%, so not even a majority mandate for Trump. So it is thinner than people think. Everyone thinks, oh, because all the swing states went to Trump, they think it's a resounding election, but actually it's a really shallow election with a very, very narrow majority, indeed. So that's one thing to consider when we're thinking, will Trump be able to pass through X, Y, and Z? Or if it's even remotely controversial and you get any kickback in the House of Representatives, it's going to be difficult. But around the world, we are seeing anti-establishment movements taking place all the time. Now, speaking of which, Romania, first round of the presidential election there, you had Călin Georgescu, the pro-Russian, I don't know what you call him, nationalist eco-fascist. He got through largely on account of TikTok. TikTok was then called to the EU, called to Romania to account for what was going on there. Was TikTok being manipulated, and what are they doing about it? So it's turned out that, according to their own analysis, TikTok, 66,000 fake accounts and 10 million fake followers were removed. That's TikTok alone, and just for Romania's election. So multiply that across all the countries in the world and the elections that Russia is actively trying to manipulate, and you get a sense of how TikTok and Twitter and social media platforms generally are being manipulated by nefarious state actors. These are weapons of war, information war, cyber war, that then can manifest in conventional war. But my goodness, this is war. And TikTok is a weapon. Twitter is a weapon. Elon Musk is a tool. A big, fat tool of Russia and China. So that's the scale of what we're up against on these platforms, says Akash Maniam here. Multiply the 66,000 fake accounts concerning the Romanian election, 10 million fake followers. And yeah, they might be the same ones that are used in other cases, but TikTok is being manipulated. The users are being manipulated. TikTok's admitted, according to Derek Tanis, the Romanian source here, has admitted the pro-Russian Călin Georgescu was promoted on their platform by two massive bot networks, one of which was affiliated with Russia. That's TikTok admitting that. Quite conveniently for Georgescu, TikTok delayed removing the networks until after round one of the presidential elections. That is absolutely insane, but so important that at least TikTok have done something about that, and hopefully pressure can be put on TikTok. This is why the EU is so important. People think of the EU and they think, oh, especially if you're like a Brexiteer and you're thinking, oh, we want to be out of that. But when you have a network of countries, this is like how trade blocks work as well. The power that you can have, if it can be used for good, then it's incredibly important. So the EU is insanely important for doing things across countries in terms of fighting disinformation. The EU can summon TikTok and say, right, if you don't sort it out, you ain't going to be appearing in the EU. Whereas if Britain did that, yeah, we can do that, but it only affects Britain, and you then have to have the same ruling, and then the British are like, how come they get, if it's an EU-wide thing, the power of the EU when it can be used for good is impressive. And actually, in the context of the domain of disinformation and social media and tax and things like that. And that's why the EU is really important for tax and really important for climate change and initiatives, is because you can do good things and make sure that everyone is operating to the same standards, and no one opts out that or free rides on that and says, oh, I can make this cheaper by doing this and that, and brilliant, I can sell this and not have stringent rules applied to me. And it means that also, if things are being imported in, if they're not made with those strict rules in place, then actually we won't allow them to be imported in. And so there's a real usefulness. Now, I don't want to get into a debate about the EU, but in terms of like disinformation, they have a position of power in terms of being able to hold people like Elon Musk or institutions like organizations like TikTok and Twitter to account. This is why Elon Musk hates the EU, because that is a challenge to him, because they want Twitter to be beholden to regulation on disinformation. And so that's why he's railing against all of these potential challenges, these regulatory challenges to him. And that's why he's so happy that Trump's got in. He gave Trump the megaphone for his election, for his campaign, and the money for him to get elected, so that he could strip away regulation that was coming from the US and the investigations more properly from the US, from the SEC, FFC, all those acronyms that were investigating Musk. They will be almost certainly dropped after January the 20th, and he will have free reign to do what he likes. Now, Hungary is gone, speaking on Russian state-controlled FSB TV, says Sean Pinner here. So RT is showing Peter Szijjarto, who is the foreign minister for Hungary. Hungary are very pro-Russian. Here is your main face of Hungary after Orban going out and presenting himself on the Russian propagandist television network. War and peace, NATO troops, sanctions and more. Hungarian foreign minister speaks exclusively with RT. Watch a full interview here on Rumble, of course, because they're banned from other places, RT. Now, that is, it's a shame. I think Hungary are just firmly in the orbit of Russia now, aren't they? Now we will go just sideways a little bit to Bulgaria, or at least to Bulgarians in the UK. These three are in court at the moment for spying. I've reported on them previously, but it's more news about them from Christopher Miller in the Financial Times. A ring of Bulgarian spies working for Russia targeted Ukrainian soldiers believed to be undergoing training in complex air defense systems at a US military base. A London court heard on Tuesday. So that military US base being, I presume, then in London. In the UK. But so in court at the moment. The prosecution argues they were acting under the direction of Jan Marsalek, Austrian national, who's involved in the wire. What's it called? Wire. What's the name of his company? Anyway, an Austrian national who was allegedly liaising with Russian intelligence. Marsalek, who used the alias Rupert Tish, believed the base was hosting Ukrainian forces who were being trained to use Patriot surface-to-air missile systems. A US facility near Stuttgart, actually, but they were living in the UK, these three Bulgarians, but it was at Stuttgart that the training the US base was. The group's ringleader, Orlin Rusev, 46, discussed with Marsalek using IMSI catchers to intercept and track mobile phone data from military personnel inside the base. Rusev had pleaded guilty to conspiracy to spy. IMSI devices can track mobile phones and extract sensitive information such as passwords. Alison Morgan KC for the Crown Prosecution Service told the court that this surveillance was being carried out in October and November 2022 at an absolutely crucial time in Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Quote, the Ukrainian soldier on the airbase has his phone completely identified, and where does he take that phone after he's been trained on that airbase? Morgan said she added this could not be more serious in terms of the type of information that they were trying to gather to allow people to know exactly where Ukrainian soldiers with this type of deployment might be in the future. In other words, when you were trained in Stuttgart on the Patriot system and you get your phone essentially kind of mirrored or whatever, you can track it. That chap then goes to Ukraine. He's got his mobile phone with him. He's operating a Patriot air defense system in Ukraine. The Russians know where the Patriot air defense system is. That's how forethoughtful these approaches are. And I'm glad that they were found out there. It's incredible what can be done, and it just goes to show how much security is needed. Right, going on to US politics and how it pertains to the war in Ukraine. So the US has announced that it's imposing new sanctions on 35 entities and vessels that play a major role in transporting illicit Iranian oil to foreign markets. So there's this, and I wonder if these are new entities or whether the US is reflecting what the UK and the EU has done in terms of Russian and Iranian oil, although this is Iranian oil transportation, but there seems to be a tightening of these oil exports, sanctions and closing loopholes and taking on more entities and sanctioning them. Now, Speaker Johnson today has said, according to Voice of America, that there are no plans to provide additional aid to Ukraine. So that's it. Aid to Ukraine's gone, unless something changes, which is interesting because, it is part of their supposed Kellogg plan, which is if Russia don't come to the table, then they will give loads more aid to Ukraine. So I guess that's still, at least conceptually, on the table. Quote, it's not Joe Biden's place to make that decision. We have a new president-elect and we're going to take the lead from the new commander-in-chief on all of this. But no plans to provide new aid. I'm up and down with what's going to happen with Trump. My problem is that Trump doesn't want Ukraine to win from a moral, political point of view. He's yet to be convinced, I think, or maybe he's in the process of being convinced. But before he was elected, it was very clear that he never called Putin a dictator, a demagogue, he never called him a murderous war criminal, anything like that other people did. Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, etc., etc. Trump has always been beholden to, I think, the kind of star qualities of these strongmen leaders around the world. And unfortunately, Mike Johnson is not disabusing us of that notion. It does appear that, it's more likely that the US... I don't know. I'm just up and down. When I listen to Keith Kellogg, I think, oh yeah, this is all right. No, this could be good. And then I listen to people like Mike Johnson, and I think, and then others that we're going to talk about in a second. Now, just with regard to the US, a Chinese man has been arrested in the US on suspicions of arms shipments to North Korea. So a Chinese man illegally residing in the US was arrested for allegedly shipping weapons to North Korea. I don't know how you ship weapons to North Korea. What weapons you can get hold of? I know they've got more guns that you can poke a hairy stick at, but in terms of like weapons that North Korea would need, I don't know. But anyway, he's allegedly shipped weapons to North Korea from the US. The Justice Department said on December the 3rd. I haven't looked at the details of that though, but there you go. Now, from the war briefing from The Guardian today, I just thought this part was interesting. So Antony Blinken, the outgoing US Secretary of State, paid his final visit to NATO headquarters in Brussels on Tuesday, promising Joe Biden's administration would keep seeking to funnel arms to Ukraine in the little time he has left in power. So bear in mind what Mike Johnson's just said, and it's obvious that, it's not looking like there's going to be help forthcoming, at least in the immediate future, post January the 20th. Quote, "This is a vital moment for the alliance to make sure we're level set for the year ahead," Blinken said. "Like it or not, you've got me and you've got us until the 20th of January, every minute, every day." End quote. So this, I think that using a bit of inference there, I think that's, good luck after that. We'll do everything we can now for you, but I don't fancy your chances after January the 20th. Now, Donald Trump, soon to be president, has cast doubt on maintaining US support, and we just heard from Mike Johnson, and vowed to cut a quick deal to end the war, says the newspaper. The NATO head, Mark Rutte, so this is the part that I thought was incredibly important. So Mark Rutte, who is Secretary General of NATO, that is previously the Premier of the Netherlands, he had previously stood up to Donald Trump. I wonder whether that's at a previous NATO meeting. Anyway, during Donald Trump's previous tenure, 2016 to 20, Rutte had stood up to Trump publicly, and actually Trump supposedly gave him respect for that, which is why he was thought to be the best choice for the Secretary General of NATO, because he has already got Trump's respect. And so he's a good person to then argue on behalf of Ukraine. Whereas had it been Kaja Kallas or someone like that, a woman particularly as well, like Trump might not have, that might not have been the best person to have found purchase with Trump. Okay, so Mark Rutte said, "We wish you the best after January, but we need you until January the 20th every day, and we know we can count on you. You've been a staunch ally, and people like you very much." It's interesting that it seems that Mark Rutte is, keen on the kind of help that the US has given already, although we can argue it's been too slow, and it's not been, they've had too many restrictions, etc., etc. But it looks like Mark Rutte and NATO are equally worried about what's going to happen after January the 20th. So the Kyiv Independent reports Antony Blinken say Ukraine has hard decisions to make about further mobilization. So we know that the US think that the Ukrainians should mobilize younger people, and we talked about demographic challenges there. But the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has described mobilization as critical for Ukraine, adding that despite having funds and ammunition, people are needed to repel Russian aggression. And he's right, but this is a dilemma. It's a dilemma both for Ukraine and Russia. Neither side want to do a full mobilization because they know it'll be economic and political suicide. It'll be really challenging. Now, this is where I get onto why I'm afraid past January the 20th, because the sorts of people that are at the center of the American government, at least kind of, I think Elon Musk literally is at the center of the US government. He's placed himself in the White House, and in him and Vivek Ramaswamy as the leaders of Doge, in charge of stripping $2 trillion worth of spending out of the US budget. So there's that issue, and we know that Elon Musk's views on Ukraine are problematic, but you've got other people who are associated with the wider GOP campaign, the communications of the GOP objectives, and so on and so forth. Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, two of the most popular podcasters and spokespeople in terms of the amount of people that listen to these guys. Tucker Carlson's back in Moscow. He's already gone over to Moscow kind of unilaterally, decision-wise, and without the commendation, I guess, of the US government or anything like that. He went to Moscow and interviewed Putin, and that gave Putin purchase in the US psyche, right? So you heard Trump supporters at Trump rallies saying, "Oh yeah, I like Putin because I heard what he had to say to Tucker Carlson, and he seems fine by me." So Tucker Carlson acted as a Russian propaganda megaphone that did convince people in America that Putin was all right. So this is how divisive someone like Tucker Carlson is. Now he's going to Moscow again. Why? To interview Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister. It is really, really controversial. Tucker Carlson, we're back in Moscow. Here's why. I don't even want to listen to him. I don't want to listen to you, Tucker Carlson. Anyway, he says he's back in interview and has interviewed Lavrov. A US far-right pundit, Tucker Carlson, said today that he returned to Moscow for an interview with the Russian foreign minister, promising it would be released very soon. Yes. Oh dear. And then Candace Owen has backed Russia against Ukraine's, quote, homosexual actor president. You know, the guy that's got, I think, a law degree and is the president of Ukraine in a war that has been absolutely incredible in what he has done for that country. And yet Candace Owens presenting this, I've said this before, I got it right, I said Uncle Sam, I meant Uncle Tom, approach to, she has a lot of power with it, not power, a lot of, she is it's very, I guess, has a lot of reach in the information spaces of the Republican Party and on the right in the US. She is a black woman who often says things like anti-BLM stuff that is kind of pro-white narrative, and therefore a lot of white people on the right really like her because it's like, that's a black person saying the sort of stuff that I would say, and she's black, and so therefore it's even more powerful, and it's kind of almost like enemy attestation. So she is really, really popular for that, and for having these very like MAGA views as well. I absolutely despise Candace Owens. I really don't like her. So anyway, the Here Raw Story reports that right-wing influencer Candace Owens came out in support of Russian victory in Ukraine after claiming that Ukrainian President Zelensky was a homosexual actor. In a Tuesday post on Twitter, Owens said she would never hope that Zelensky triumphs over an Orthodox Russia, quote. Spiritually, this is her speaking, I just know that's wrong, she wrote. You simply do not support a homosexual actor that is locking up churches and bishops. Which is absolute nonsense. It's just Russian propaganda that's being spread by this really divisive character. Although there is no evidence that Zelensky is gay, right-wing figures like Ted Nugent have insisted that the Ukrainian leader is a, quote, homosexual weirdo. Zelensky has expressed support for LGBTQ plus rights. In 2022, he said that the country's constitution made it impossible to legalise same-sex marriage. Still, he was working with the government for solutions regarding the legalisation of registered civil partnership in Ukraine as part of the work on establishing and ensuring human rights and freedoms, you know, like Britain and like the US, okay? So, yeah. And in 2003, Zelensky married Ukrainian screenwriter Olena Zelenska and has children, you know, with just infuriates me that Tucker Carlson gets to do what he does and say what he says with impunity. Candace Owen gets away with saying rank despicable stuff, and they are deeply, deeply popular in the in certain areas of the right in the US. It just makes me so sad. Right, and Applebaum talks about, or here gives a post or that she found on 3 different approaches. This is from Max24 actually, on 3 different approaches to the peace deals, to a potential peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. None of these plans, she says, explain how the Russians will be made to stop fighting. And this is part of my worry that I have. I said this in a previous video, or did I say it earlier in this video? Which is that I worry that Russia will be let off the hook slightly by an American administration forcing negotiations between the two. And I think they will try and force Ukraine's hand more than they force Russia's hand. And Ukraine will have to be the ones giving up more than Russia. And Ukraine will be the ones that will be focused on by the Americans. Grenell proposes to create an autonomous zone in the east of Ukraine as part of the peace agreement and believes that Ukraine's membership in NATO is not in the interest of the US. Kellogg's plan includes a ceasefire based on the freezing of the existing front line in the time of settlement, and Vance's proposal could include the demilitarization of the demarcation line between Russia and Ukraine and a guarantee for Russia and Kiev not to join NATO, that Kiev will not join NATO. It's all about what Ukraine won't do. Ukraine won't do this, Ukraine won't do that, and you can have this and that part Ukraine will be, and this will also happen, that'll be frozen. Hang on, how about what Russia won't be able to do? No one's talked about, okay, you shouldn't be able to export oil, or sanctions should continue on you, or you need to pay reparations, or it's all about, no, Ukraine won't be able to do this, and Ukraine won't be able to do that. And that's what I mean by focusing on Ukraine more than Russia. And it seems to me completely asymmetrical. And I really don't like the idea of these forced negotiations. Like, none of the plans are good in my book. None of them are good. None of them are good for Ukraine. In fact, Shashank Joshi talks about this, says Keith Kellogg. So in replying to Anne Applebaum there, says Kellogg does not have a developed view of how Russia will be made to stop fighting. He relies on a threat to escalate support to Ukraine should Russia fail to engage. One problem is that Russia can string out the talks, and that Trump will concurrently need to coerce Ukraine in the opposite direction. So it's like, okay, we'll come to the table because we're going to stop Ukraine doing X, Y, and Z, but Russia will just come to the table and then string out the talks and keep the fighting going. In other words, they're paying lip service to being at negotiations. Meanwhile, they're doing all this other stuff where Ukraine are almost certainly going to have to give up certain things in coming to the table. So Joshi continues, I share the assessment that Russian strategic aims have not changed. However, I don't think that means Russia will reject any deal. They might see a deal as sufficiently advantageous that it's worth taking as an interim measure. That'll be a calculated gamble that could turn out to be wrong, says Joshi. Some thoughts there for you to consider. Now, just pay attention to certain things going on in the US going forward. I've been talking about how they've been democratically backsliding or are looking to do so. Certain people like America's First Patriot comes on and say, you got to be kidding, blah, blah, blah. No, like clearly Project 2025 for a start, the intention to strip out the government from all sorts, not just like trying to cut costs, but actually if you've got oligarchic billionaires at the center of the White House making decisions about government spending or strong-arming decisions about government spending to the tune of, the objective is 2 trillion. That's the entire budget, more than the entire budget or the cost of all federal employees. That's over double the DoD budget, which is phenomenal. You've got influence from money. You've got all the people being put in charge appear to be billionaires and millionaires of certain, the ambassadors that are being placed in charge or being nominated at the moment. It's just all an open door to corruption. And I'm really scared about what might take place in the US. And here's an example, which is, we're not going to touch Medicaid. We're not going to touch Medicare and Medicaid. Well, Representative Richard McCormick comes along and says, now we've got elected in.
The problem with the Democrats is they've never run out of things that they can give away for free, quote unquote. When you talk about $1 trillion in debt payment just on interest alone every year, we can't just talk about the military, though. And the military can do some things better. We can save some money just in the way contract. We're going to be careful that we don't decrease our abilities because China is right on our heels. However, if you talk about 75% of the budget, 75% is non-discretionary. We're going to have some hard decisions. We got to bring the Democrats in and talk about Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. There's hundreds of billions of dollars to be saved, and we know how to do it. We just have to have the stomach to actually take those challenges on. But we can't just talk about our discretionary budget.
So Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, hundreds of billions of dollars can be saved. We just have to have the stomach to take those challenges on. It's going to be deeply unpopular. We said we wouldn't do it. We're going to do it. Trump said, he wasn't going to do that. Now he's going to do that. So this is you know, what the US is in store for. But what really annoys me about that is 8 trillion of that debt was added by who? Donald Trump. Phenomenal amount added by Donald Trump. And yeah, you know, COVID is going to be somewhat responsible for that, but already before that, you know, things were, writing was on the wall.
That's less than 25% of our budget. We have to have some real hard discussions.
So I think you're going to have a pretty crazy next couple of years. But on the other hand, watch out for this. And I want to make some predictions. And the predictions are that certainly in the moment, unless tariffs get introduced really quickly, the American economy is doing really well. And it's been doing really well because Bidenomics worked. And I've said this, and some of you GOPers have been like, no, absolute nonsense. That's why they lost the election. No, they lost the election on perception of inflation. Also, I listened to a really interesting analysis this morning that what happened during the Biden administration is that the payouts they were getting for COVID also stopped at that point. So, you know, COVID, the pandemic went, and some people stopped getting some sort of government handouts. Meanwhile, inflation was going up at that time due to COVID and the energy crisis. And there was a double whammy, and that has left a really bad taste in people's mouths. But actually, those government handouts were really important for allowing the society to keep functioning, but of course they couldn't go on ad infinitum. But anyway, Connor Rogers here says, I'm going to scream about this for the rest of my life. Democrats were so committed to existing rules and group pleasing that most of our signature work took 2 to 4 years to get started and will now be ribbon cut by Trump. The narrative that Trump saved the economy and manufacturing will now live on for a generation. So this is as a result of the kind of stats like this. The rise in US manufacturing. So there's been this manufacturing boom as a result of the Chips and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the infrastructure bill. So the rise in US manufacturing construction spend is absolutely mind-blowing. So many chips and IRA fueled factories are about to start opening in January, you're not going to believe it. Just the stats speak for themselves, and this is all directly as a result of Bidenomics. You might think that as a swear word in your head, but actually just look at the data. And the situation is that Trump will sing the praises of his own administration for being responsible for this in the same way he did when he took over from Obama's 8 years of economic stability, and then he like, check out how cool I am, and then sort of cuts taxes and so on and so forth. Just want to remind you of the whole Hunter Biden thing. Lots of talk about pardoning still going on. Trump would never have pardoned a criminal like Hunter on his way out of office. He would, however, pardon Blackwater contractors jailed for the massacre of Iraqi civilians. Someone who lied on his gun application form. Like some people saying it's a horrific thing, Hunter Biden. He should be blah 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 blah. It's like, hang on, Trump pardoned people who massacred Iraqi civilians. He literally pardoned them. Don't give me any kind of false equivalence there. Absolute nonsense. Anyway, I wanted to just make sure that I said that at some point. Now, there's all this thing between Canada and the US, and of course tariffs. Is it true that Trump reportedly told Justin Trudeau that Canada could become the 51st state of America? Wow, ouch. And Trump put this on Truth Social, which is a massive Canadian flag, Trump standing over and then overlooking, obviously, the Rocky Mountains. Oh no, it's Matterhorn, that famous Canadian mountain, the Matterhorn. Right, okay. Is that in the Alps? I think so. Anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate your support. Just watch out. I know that last part wasn't specifically to do with the US, but to do with Ukraine. But I am worried about democratic backsliding in the US. So watch all the things that happen, all the rules that they're suggesting putting in place. And if you start seeing democratic backsliding in the US, then the reason it's important for me to mention that in a video like this is that, for me, this is a battle of democracy against autocracy. That is what's happening in Ukraine. Right? Ukraine is looking to the West to say, this is the ideal we want. We want to reject Eastern autocracy, Russian autocracy, and we want to move towards this enlightened political ideal. at the same time, the US is going, oh yeah, you think we're all that? Well, actually, backsliding. And then you look in the EU, and you've got Hungary and Slovakia, and you've got all these nations going, yeah, we're not too sure anymore. We've got a bit bored of doing quite well, thank you. We've got bored of being stable. We've got bored of having 70 years of peace. We've got bored of this. We've got bored of that. So, hey, let's have some crazy autocracy. And I just really feel that the world is, unless we are super careful, the world is sliding towards autocracy. You look at Georgia, and I'm worried deeply about Georgia, and they're really cracking down hard at the moment. So there you go. Anyway, that's enough from me. Now, I'm going to leave you with a couple of minutes of pure conceit here. I played this to you ages ago. This is done by one of you viewers. Thank you so much for doing this. A bit of AI music, almost in the style of Evanescence, it sounds. But writing this song themselves, I love it. But it is a bit cringe for me to hear my own voice and hear my own name being mentioned like this. But I just love the song. It's really cool. Anyway, thank you so much for watching and listening. Check out this song. It's by Rizit's World. Go and check it out on YouTube.
When the world's in turmoil and truth is hard to find, Jonathan Pierce is the one who eases our minds. On ATP Geopolitics, he breaks it down so clear, from the heart of Ukraine to the headlines we hear. Jonathan Pierce with updates on the line, bringing us the news in these uncertain times. From Kyiv to the front lines, he's our trusted guide. In the world of geopolitics, he's on our side. The front lines he did go to bring us first-hand stories, the truths we need to know. With every new development, he's there to explain the struggles and the triumphs, the losses and the gains. Jonathan Pierce with updates on the line, bringing us the news in these uncertain times. He's on our side.